So this is what happens when you go first. All right, is it? How's that? I can. All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for being here. You know, I speak at a lot of events around the country, around the world. I speak at economic conferences. I speak at investment forums. But this is actually my first political speech. And I was actually told I was only going to have 5 minutes. So I guess I'm going to be improvising a lot because now I'm told I have 20. But in any event, just a little bit about my background, and I'll get into why I'm seeking elected office. I was born here in Connecticut, in New Haven. My father was born here, and my grandfather emigrated to this country in 1910. He was a carpenter, and he actually worked on the Yale Bowl. I lived in the state as a child, but moved out in elementary school and moved around the country. I spent most of my life out in California, and that's where I established my company, Euro Pacific Capital. But I relocated back to the Connecticut area in 2004, and I moved my company from Newport Beach, although I still maintain an office there, and I moved to Darien, and I've since moved my headquarters to Westport, Connecticut. My firm, I mainly deal with individual investors. I don't deal with a lot of institutions. I deal with some, not with hedge funds. It's mainly retail investors, just like the people in this room, like the voters of Connecticut. And unfortunately, based on the policies that have been pursued in Washington, both by the government and by the Federal Reserve, I found it necessary to advise my clients to invest their money abroad. I'm not just using international investments as a means of diversification. I'm really concerned about what Washington has been doing to our economy, and more importantly, to the value of our money, the value of our dollar. This organization is about taxpayers, but a lot of people forget that one of the most insidious taxes is inflation. And that's the tax that I've been trying to protect my clients from, the debasement of the value of their savings and their investments. So I've had to buy stocks around the world. I've bought corporations. I've invested in debt securities, corporate debt, government debt, all denominated in foreign currencies. And unfortunately, I've had to advise my clients to buy a lot of precious metals, a lot of gold and silver, to try to protect their wealth from what's been happening in Washington. Which probably brings me to why I'm running. Rather than simply observing as a spectator what's going on in Washington and trying to protect a few Americans. I think I have about 15,000 clients, but instead of trying to protect them from the misguided policies in Washington, maybe it's time I actually went to Washington and tried to do something about it. I've been a vocal critic on the sidelines. I'm not, just sitting back at home. I wrote a book called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. So I tried to warn people what was coming. I went on television. I've been going on national television since 2005. I've been a regular on CNN, on CNBC, on Fox, on Bloomberg. They started calling me Dr. Doom back in 2005. And I was on television when it was very unpopular to talk about a coming economic collapse. nobody wanted to listen to me. People were more interested in making fun of me than taking me seriously. But I persisted, and ultimately, the facts have vindicated my forecasts. But what troubles me more than what's already happened is what I see that is going to happen if we don't stop. See, I knew all along, and I had a lot of debates on television, more so with conservatives and Republicans than I did with Democrats. See, the problem was, under the George Bush presidency, George Bush embraced a free market rhetoric. And in many respects, he's the Herbert Hoover of our generation. And I was very critical of the policies that were being pursued under that administration by both Congress and by the Federal Reserve. I understood the phony nature of the economic recovery they had created. And I was criticizing that. But unfortunately, most of the people on the financial programs, who also, I guess, were Republicans, far more so than Democrats, were ridiculing me. They felt a need to defend the policies simply because there was a Republican administration. And I knew that ultimately that would come back to bite us. Because I knew that when the economic collapse came, a collapse that was completely created by bad government policy, by bad monetary policy, I knew that the free market was going to get the blame. And I knew that the government was going to take the opportunity of that crisis to expand its power in ways that it never could have absent that crisis. And I know from history that whenever there's a crisis, that the public is always drop their guard. They're willing to surrender liberties and power to the government because the government promises a solution. But people have to understand, and the politicians have to understand, that this country is really teetering on the edge of the financial abyss, not because we had too much freedom or too much capitalism, but because we had too much government. People have to understand that Washington is not the solution to our problems. That Washington is the cause of our problems. That the stimulus is not going to help. The stimulus is why we're sick. The stimulus is actually toxic. All the economic stimulus out of Washington is in effect a sedative. It is sedating the productive elements of our economy while stimulating all of the problems. I mean, if you think back to the most recent events and how we got into this mess, and why I don't want these mistakes repeated, because the consequences now are much greater. When George Bush first was elected president, he inherited a situation similar to the situation that Barack Obama finds himself in. There was a bubble under his predecessor. We had a phony economy that was brought on by a monetary policy that was excessively loose under Alan Greenspan. The result of too much cheap money in the 1990s was that we had a stock market bubble. Now, I was a stockbroker. My firm was a lot smaller back then, but I was publicly warning in 1997, 1998, 1999 that there was a bubble in the stock market, that there was a bubble in internet stocks, and that the bubble was going to burst, and that when it did, we would have a rather severe recession. Well, I was right about the bubble. It burst. The market did exactly what I said it would do. But unfortunately, I was wrong about the severe recession. It didn't come. Now, why didn't it come? It didn't come because George Bush and Alan Greenspan decided to stimulate the economy. So instead of having a real recession that would have helped purge the economy of all the mistakes that were made during that boom, we didn't have a recession. Instead, Americans went into debt. We had a very, very shallow recession, technically, for a couple of quarters. But during that recession, we had record car sales and record home sales, all financed with debt. We borrowed trillions and trillions of dollars, and we spent it all.